One indicator has flashed a warning before essentially every US recession for more than half a century. It is the most cited recession signal in finance, and it just did something remarkable. It finished the longest warning in its recorded history, and then quietly switched off. Most people read that switch off as the all clear. History suggests that is almost exactly backwards. Because the inverted yield curve is not a stopwatch that counts down to a crash, and the moment it uninverts is not the safe moment, it is often the dangerous one. This is the story of what this famous line actually measures, why it has been right so many times, and why the very way most people read it sets them up to misread it at the worst possible moment. Here is why this one line gets so much attention. Normally, longer loans pay more than shorter ones because your money is tied up longer and more can go wrong. So long-term government bonds usually yield more than short-term ones, and the curve slopes gently upward. An inversion, when short-term yields rise above long-term yields, is the market turning that logic upside down, and it has preceded the last 8 US recessions. The version most people quote, the 10-year minus the 2-year, has led 7 of the last 8 recessions since 1968, with only a couple of false alarms. That is an extraordinary record for any single number, but a record that good creates its own trap because people start treating it as magic and stop asking the more important question: what is it actually telling you, and when? Consider what just happened, because it was historic. The 10-year minus 2-year spread turned negative in July 2022 and stayed there for the longest continuous stretch on record, dropping as far as negative 108 basis points in the summer of 2023, an inversion depth not seen in decades. On the measure the Federal Reserve prefers, the 3-month against the 10-year, the curve was inverted from October 2022 all the way to December 2024, the longest such stretch in about 45 years. By every historical rulebook, that should have made a recession almost inevitable. And yet through that entire period, the economy kept expanding, with growth running near 3%. So either the signal finally broke, or almost everyone was reading it wrong. It is the second one. Here is the mechanism, and it changes everything about how you read the signal. A long-term interest rate is, roughly, the market's average guess of where short-term rates will be over the years ahead. Short-term rates are set by the central bank. So, when the 10-year yield falls below the 2-year, the bond market is really saying one thing: we expect the central bank to be cutting rates in the future. And why would the central bank cut? Because it expects the economy to weaken. So an inversion is not a cause of recession, and it is not a countdown timer. It is the bond market pricing in expected easing, which is another way of saying it is pricing in expected trouble somewhere down the road. That is why the lead time is so long and so variable, anywhere from about 7 to 24 months, because it reflects an expectation, not an event. The curve is a forecast, and forecasts play out on their own schedule, not yours. Now the part almost everyone gets backwards. If the inversion is the market expecting cuts, then the moment the central bank actually starts cutting is the moment the curve turns back up, un-inverts, and steepens. And that turning point, historically, has clustered right before recessions began, not the inversion years earlier. Look at the pattern before the recessions of the early 90s, the early 2000s, and 2008. The curve inverted, everyone panicked, then it uninverted as the Fed cut, and the downturn arrived around that steepening. So the uninversion is not the all clear. It is often the last mile, which brings us to now. That record-long inversion ended, the curve uninverted through late 2024, and by the middle of 2026, the 10-year Cites back above the 2-year, around positive 46 basis points. To the casual reader, danger past. To someone who understands the mechanism, the curve just moved into the phase that has historically mattered most. It also had two famous false alarms in 1966 and 1998, so it is a lens, not a promise. So here is how to hold this indicator honestly. Do not read an inversion as a countdown clock because the lead time is long, variable, and has misfired before. And do not read an un-inversion as the danger passing, because historically, that steepening is the phase that has sat closest to actual downturns. What the curve gives you is not a date. It is a window into what the bond market expects the central bank to do, and therefore what it quietly fears about growth. That is genuinely useful, as long as you read it as an expectation rather than a promise. The forward question worth sitting with is this. Now that the longest inversion on record has ended and the curve has turned back up, is this the boring all clear the headlines assume, or the same setup the last several cycles quietly rhymed with?